That one mark.
Challenging Rockefeller's oil empire was quite ambitious, but thanks to the huge demand for gas and oil, Shell had many opportunities to rise to the top.
What is your petrol? Super Shell with ICA. Super Shell with ICA. Gives more go for what you pay. Family motorists in the know. Stop for Super Shell and go.
During the First World War, Shell was the main fuel supplier for the British Army and the only supplier of aviation fuel. In Nigeria, you wasted no time getting to work. You form a partnership with Nigeria's government to make sure that no one comes between you and your billion-dollar profits. When wellheads explode and it pollutes the people's water supply, you just shrug your shoulders and say it's not your fault. You don't care if people's main source of drinking water has been poisoned. You don't care that farmers have to stay away from their own farms out of fear of igniting a fire. Or the few brave farmers who dare to return to their home have to literally swim through a sea of crude oil. Due to the polluted water, Nigeria's people were facing severe health risks. Families were drinking cancer-causing substances with every sip of water. It also had a devastating effect on farming and fishing.
The source of income is killed off.
All of this pain and suffering led to protests against Shell. They wanted Shell out. They wanted these foreigners to stop taking their wealth and destroying their home, but you were having none of it. With Nigeria's government in your pockets, you allegedly go to them and whisper in their ears, if you want us to keep lining your pockets, you better get the military to take care of those pesky protesters. And in an instant, these protesters' fates were sealed. Shell, a private multinational corporation, now had an entire standing army at its beck and call, and the result was brutal. Guns went off, grenades were thrown, as the military launched a full-blown assault against all those protesters. In the end, 80 people were killed and almost 600 homes were burned to the ground. Witnesses saw the police rushing in, quote, like an invading army that vowed to take the last drop of the enemy's blood, end quotes. Shell now had a winning formula. Whenever there was a protest, Nigeria's military would rush in to save the day. In April 1993, the military wounded 11 people who were protesting against a new pipeline. A few days later, troops opened fire on protesters at a village, killing one man. But Shell soon ran into another problem. The Nigerian military was poorly equipped to defend your oil operation, so you even allegedly provided the Nigerian military with boats, buses, and helicopters. And of course, they also get a nice paycheck for their violent services. After Nigeria's task force shot at thousands of protesters outside of Shell's compound, you feel nothing but gratitude. So you pay the responsible general and his men a nice fee, and you tell them that you're looking forward to collaborating with them more in the future.
The military may rape the women, torture you, they loot our properties, and they were burning houses.
But Shell's greatest enemy was still out there. Ken Saro-Wiwa was a Nigerian writer and environmental activist. He was also the president of the MOSOP, the Movement for the Survival of the Ogoni People. In 1993, he led a non-violent protest against the pollution of the Ogoniland's land and waters.
We are going to demand our rights peacefully, non-violently, and we shall win.
Remember, the Ogoniland is a region in southeast Nigeria with large oil reserves. But that protest didn't go as planned, because in the following weeks, Shell continued to expand its operations in the Ogoniland, devastating more communities in the process, all with the blessing of Nigeria's government. In the eyes of Shell, this activist Ken Saro-Wiwa proved to be a nuisance. He was the most stubborn protester you faced so far, an idealist who would stop at nothing to get Shell out of Nigeria. Saro-Wiwa and his MOSOP group started to sabotage Shell's infrastructure and even intimidated Shell's workers. And his strategy worked. Shell had to pause its operations in the Ogoniland for a good amount of time, and every single day the operations were paused, you were losing out on tons of profits. All because of one man. Shell had found a worthy opponent, and it needed to teach this guy a lesson. And here's the thing, when you're faced with a worthy opponent and you have the opportunity to strike, you cannot hold back, you cannot show any mercy. Why? Because if you only crush your enemy partially, they'll eventually recover and seek revenge. That's why the only way to win is to crush your enemy totally. We're talking absolute brutality to make sure that they can never get back up. So you allegedly sit down with Nigeria's government and map out a plan to take down Saro-Wiwa and his Mosop group once and for all. Only 3 weeks later, you see your opening. 4 of the local chiefs were brutally murdered by a mob of angry youth. This was the perfect opportunity to pin those murders on your enemy. Saro-Wiwa wasn't in the area that day, but that doesn't matter. You allegedly make sure that he's arrested for enticing those murders, allegedly pay off a few locals to give false testimonies at the trial, and boom. Saro-Wiwa, Shell's #1 enemy, suffered in jail for over a year before they found him and 8 other Mosop leaders guilty. On November 10, 1995, Saro-Wiwa and the rest of the Igoni 9 were hanged by the military. The message to the locals was clear: get in the way of Shell's profits, and this would be your fate.
So the prison one, they called me, oh, your husband said you have to pick up his stuff. So I took it and I was just screaming, crying. Is this true that you guys already killed my husband? He's gone? And some of them were just telling me the story. What happened before my husband died? They say your husband.
I never imagined this.
For future assignments and to make sure that they would keep doing their favors. And they were really not sending a signal that killing people is out of the order.
To this day, Shell denies any involvement in the executions.
No